when I'm thinking about human-centered design, I know people tend to almost take the cliche and always think that it's always about like participatory in that. But I think to me that's any kind of, it's when you think about technology fitting into the world of people. And again, when I'm talking about the world of people, I'm not just talking about users and what people can do with it. I'm talking about our basic human existence on this planet needs to be included in that. So I think it's planetary concerns as well. So it's beyond. It's not just like the selfish human. I think it's like it's kind of humanity outside of technology is really important.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Edit Undo podcast. This is going to be a very interesting episode. I think this is the first time that we're actually going to be having somebody who's been mentioned on the podcast twice, actually, as one of our guests. So I think it's going to be interesting to dive a little bit into this discussion. But I think put briefly, in some sense, as both Chanel and who was the second service designer who mentioned
Frank, I think. Yes.
Frank, that's right. Yes. Both Chanel and Frank sort of mentioned. You've played, I think, a role as a guide for a lot of UX designers, product designers, and service designers on their journey both into design and into their professional lives. And so I think, as one of the more well-known lecturers in this, in our discipline, I think it's going to be great both for myself and Stephanie, but also for the people listening to explore a little bit of this field, but from the perspective of somebody who approaches it from a different perspective. Because I guess not everyone's got a household academic that they can speak to. So hopefully we can be entertaining. And I guess, Terence, welcome to the show, and I really look forward to this discussion.
Well, thanks very much, Stephanie and Alfie. Firstly, thanks very much for inviting me. It's really nice to be on the show. And also, I think it's thanks for the very warm and, very kind introduction. Hopefully I can live up to it. But we'll see how that pans out.
Mm-hmm. Look, I've got no doubt at all.
We have very high expectations. Just putting it out there.
But one of the things that really surprised me, so Steph and I were doing a little bit of research, and we sort of checked out some of the pages, and we saw that you have over 100 citations. And how many publications was it, Steph? I can't remember.
I'm not sure how many, because I'm not good with numbers, but by that
a lot more than I would
quite
expect. Yeah, and I guess maybe an interesting place to start is like, how do you actually end up in academia? I know a number of people who have been in and around it, but it seems like the majority of people, after a certain amount of time, veer away. And you've been in the game 20 years. So firstly, how did you get there, and what's keeping you there?
Well, 20 years, I suppose it has been. I think next year I'm there for 20 years. A lot of people, I think, maybe start off when they're young with a firm plan and what they want to do with life. I definitely didn't fall into that category. A lot of the stuff just ended up kind of, it's almost like a river and you sort of end up somewhere. So I actually started, originally, I studied, my undergrad was in fine art. And this was I suppose, in the mid-90s. Where there wasn't actually many choices. And to be honest, I grew up in the West Rand. I wasn't that well educated in terms of design. And I think outside of graphic design, that's really in architecture, that it was either fine art or one of those two. And it was
Mm.
actually only really going to Wits Tech in those days where I actually learned that there were other fields of design out there. I think, to be honest, compared to now, I don't think there were that many. I mean, it wasn't
Yeah,
as wide as
for
it is
sure.
now. So I was a fine artist, or I was studied fine art, and then I was actually, weirdly enough, I was working on probably a university government project, teaching rural people how to make paper, of all things.
Oh,
Wow.
When
wow.
I actually got when I got a scholarship through Wits Tech to go do my masters in Australia for a year,
Sure.
and
Okay.
this yeah. This was about, when was it? I think it was 2002 that I went to Australia. And that really actually opened up my eyes a lot towards design. Because I think school, I mean, university in South Africa at that time was still very much probably very classic in the sense that, it was very much about following rules, doing like just going through, like the lecturers were there. They were on the top of, there was like a very big gulf between lecturers and students. And you were just like, almost felt like you were like this little guy in the system. And then going to Australia and finishing my education there was really quite different, because I had a whole different way of thinking about education. It was much more about thinking about what you're doing and the quality of like your thoughts and actions, rather than following a rule book. And I think that was very influential to me. I think even now, doing my masters over there, and then so when I came back, because I'd gone on a scholarship with Wits Tech, I actually then started working in our Department of Multimedia, which had just actually started. It was in our first or second year under Mark Edwards, which and even that department was a little bit. It had just, as I said, it had just started, and it was really interested in new media, but it didn't actually. I mean, I think we all were quite open at the time. We didn't really actually know too much about what we were doing. It was also new. Um,
When
and
you
it,
say
and
new
it, and it,
media, what is new media? Just
new
new media
media.
types.
New media is like it's almost like a coined term now, kind of like multimedia.
Oh,
That was
okay.
around in the 1990s, and they would refer to it as almost like, I think even film would fit under there, but it was very much like a term that they referred to all digital. But what was
Oh,
interesting about
sure.
this time, generally in digital, is it was very much. I mean, this was the age of director. When they were authoring CD-ROMs, so that was like
Jeez.
that was digital, and it was
Digital.
interesting. Yeah. And so the interaction design was really, I mean, this was even pre, or almost like the Flash era, but almost like a little bit before that.
Oh.
Um, and I mean, so I ended up in the Department of Multimedia for mainly because I had a master's, and they needed somebody who could actually, supervise honor
Yeah.
students, at that level. And I'd done very little bit of director, and I mean, the Adobe packages I'd done a bit. So I actually started off teaching like fourth year and first year. And really, my first year of teaching, we decided we were going to do Flash. And I used to teach the students in the day. And then I'd go home and I'd actually read up, and I would have to learn how to do Flash so I could teach the students the next day.
Wow.
Wow.
That's how new all this stuff was. And I mean,
Jeez.
so if you're thinking about the whole world of UX, it was a completely different place. And
Yeah.
then you saw things like Flash become really, really big, and they had like, I mean, Flash was like really, I mean, people laugh at it now, and they say, but it was really cool at the time because you could do anything with it. It incorporated video, visuals, but it was
Yeah.
just
It was
also a really great
revolutionary.
tool for learning how to code, because it had the visual equivalent. Like if
Ah,
you put the code in and you said red circle move 3 pixels, you could actually see it when you
no.
played.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it was really useful for that. So that's probably. I mean, I started getting into interaction design mainly because, I mean, for two reasons. Is I found it very interesting, the whole that kind of world, the programming and those kind of things. But also, I mean, truly, it was because there was an absence of anybody else to do the job, and I was like, well, I
Okay.
needed money, I needed work, so like that's where I started working there. And then I think from there, so this was like 2003, 2004, around there. And then I think that's just basically I moved more and more into digital as that progressed. But also, I think not just digital, but I think I became very interested in interaction design and also design as a field of study. And I'm talking about design extending beyond like aesthetics or how to do design. Just like what is design as a phenomenon or a way of thinking or a knowledge tradition in the world. I think to me that became really interesting. Probably one of the more influential things that happened to me is probably at about 12, 13 years ago, I started working in terms of research with a gentleman by the name of Jason Hobbs, who had just come, who had probably been working in the UK for the last few years, had come back to South Africa, and he was one of the first people to really talk about UX as like a, interaction design in terms of the business world and how that operates. And I mean, I think he's a self-professed information architect, very knowledgeable man. And we actually, I think, did a lot of research together over the years. We still work often together. And I think that kind of like movement from the academic world of like perhaps art, graphic design into the more, UX world. I think a lot of it was through our coming together. I think from my side, because he was an information architect, I think bringing the design side to his work. So it was like it was a really good, fruitful meeting of minds, and so I think we had a lot of success out of that. And I think it's one of those things. I mean, it's always really good. Sometimes when you feel like you're in the dark or in the wilderness and no one seems to get what you're talking about, it's always good to meet like a kindred spirit where it's just like, he gets it, or like, I'm not like just making this up. And I think more than anything, it was just to have that support was really useful. Because I mean, I was still working in a full-on design faculty where if you actually proposed that design was not about visuals, that wasn't the be all and end all, or just, it was almost like sacrilege. It was almost like, you're actually trying to break something beautiful.
Yeah.
And I mean, that whole kind of move away from trying to take design away from art. I mean, it sounds, again, it's, I mean, I must be very careful what I say here. This is not to say I'm not trying to diss art in any way, but there was a time when art shadow was cast too long over design. And trying to break that up and to say design can be about other things. One of the key things was about human-centeredness, which we all take for granted in design now. I think that wasn't a given 15 years ago, maybe even 10 years ago. A lot of people were still stuck in that, I'm a designer, I'm a genius, I'm going to create. Yeah. And if you say otherwise, you actually, it's almost like you're, you should be stoned or... it's some kind of blasphemy. That kind of stuff.
So how did you actually, when you had this person who was kind of like this partner, mentor, helping you path your own way through what you wanted to see within the design discipline, did you then start taking those learnings and practices and applying to the lecturers that you were teaching to the students at the time? Or how did you help shape then this course or this pathway within the university? Because you've obviously been there for almost 20 years. So you were part of that evolution to establish the curriculum, establish that has to be a study separate from fine arts.
Look, I worked with a lot of, Jason was one person, but I worked with a lot of like obviously very smart people and people that some people who were smart enough just to give us the space to do it, rather than trying to close down ideas and things like that. A lot of what we did was gradual. It happened over time. I mean, there were years when we taught Flash, and there was that kind of interaction design was the most important thing, and then the gradual move over to probably as we were saying, a more ethnographic approach to thinking about design. So I think a lot of it happened. We messed up a lot. We did things that didn't work. But I suppose the main thing is we read a lot, and we went to conferences. We tried to keep track of what people were doing overseas. And a lot of it we also just actually, intuition played a big part of it. A lot of it sticking to our guns and just thinking this is what design should be, or this is what we believe it should be, and just keep going. And the thing is, there was a certain time when the world shifted, and people started it was at first internationally and then very locally, where it started seeing that there was this big world. What we were sort of proposing in the university was actually happening out there in the corporate world and other places, which obviously gave a lot of credence to what we were trying to do. So the first few years were pretty tough, and it was quite it felt like you were almost against the world, or at least against the academic world in South Africa. But then, things started changing. We started also, and I think also a lot of my colleagues in industrial design started seeing connections there as well. So I think that also became really quite important. I think also one of the things that really drove our work was actually, it seems strange, was doing the research, writing articles about it, even if they were. If I look back at some of the early stuff we wrote, and I think we were crazy to write it. It was almost like either really brave or really stupid to put some of those ideas down. But that kind of stuff got us to meet other people that were more experienced, like international guys that had gone through this and could offer us advice. So a lot of it was, I suppose, it was like working really hard. Being super stubborn, and also perhaps maybe just being a little bit lucky at these things, and also working with really good people, who could give us a space to work, or if not directly supporting us.
So, one thing I'd like to maybe we can maybe hover on for a little bit and create a little bit of clarity. And maybe for some of the people who might not be in the discipline or might not be familiar with the term, because you sort of mentioned that there was a transition from this sort of visual understanding of what design is into a more ethnographic approach to it. I guess, could you maybe talk a little bit about maybe from a practical perspective what that means? Maybe starting with what exactly ethnographic means in terms of its relationship to design, and then what that transformation actually looked like, at least in your experience.
So if we're talking about ethnographic, it's just a fancy term for saying people-oriented. So most of us would probably, if we're thinking about user experience design, you're thinking about the user. It's a person. Now, the whole point of designing for people, or, at least having a strong consideration for the human actor within the design process is something I think over the last 10 years we very much take for granted. I think lots of young people entering design, in a strange way, it's almost difficult for them to think about how design could not be like that. So it's broadly, it's like, wow, how else would you do design? But the weird thing is, when there's many other fields where that's not taken for granted, design fields, even today. I think, for example, I don't want to tie everybody with the same brush, but I think a lot of communication design fields, still very much more about the designer and the client and the brand. And, form follows the fucking brand. Sorry. And when we started, so I didn't do a formal undergrad degree in design. So I don't want to, again, but my kind of understanding of working in design departments early on in my career is that it was still very much dominated by the designer as a genius kind of model, where the designer was seen as a person with this creative ability, and their job was just to execute on that. And also and I suppose the important part about that is design as a whole field was seen in a very different way to what it was seen now. It was very much about finishing off a product. So you got the engineering or whatever, we did all the kind of the legwork, and then designers made it just a little bit more pleasurable or more beautiful, more accepting for the clients. So, and I think it's a bit of a strange world. That's design in the 90s, even up to then, was like that wasn't that's what it was really about. Guys like Dave Carson and things like that, we were like these great like gurus of design. And I think to a large degree, I think historically that started to shift with, I think internationally with participatory movement in Europe. And very much guys like Don Norman talking about user-centered design, Park Xerox, coming out very much the world of HCI. So quite hard computing actually became very influential in the world of design. I think people sometimes think it was the other way around, that design influenced computing, but it's actually, it's really the other way around. Where we start seeing a lot of the social sciences and a lot of the methods come in where designers are much more interested in the life world of people in order to design for that. And to me, that's probably something I found very interesting. Like moving into that shift as a whole world I found it a lot more, I suppose, intellectually challenging to think about design as being in service to something else, both the clients as well as like, like, I mean, I think we now talk about users, but we're obviously talking about people. And I found that interesting, and I found it remarkably refreshing for teaching students. Because, I mean, before then, design education was about, I mean, I suppose we didn't even have the words for it back then, but it was really about how privileged you were. Like if you grew up in a home with, books on art, you were more likely to be successful in your studies because you had this so-called natural ability to understand design. But obviously, I think now we've got a better language for it, that we know it's actually, it's not an inherent disposition. It's just like, you were actually
exposed.
You grew up with that.
I love that you
exposed to it.
That you bringing that up as well, because I think that's a topic within the design community that's actually not often spoken about, which is the way the discipline of design is evolving and adapting. That it's also removing that element of privilege, and I think a lot of people don't actually realize or acknowledge that it used to be more embedded in privilege. Like you just said, we now, because we started moving from a very output focused visual aesthetic product output, and rather moving to a way of thinking that makes it also a lot more accessible to a whole different group of people.
Exactly, and I think that's what lots of our research was based on. It was like the premise of it. Because, I mean, like, when we talk about privilege, we're talking about access and knowledge of Western civilization when you're talking about design. I mean, that's really what it's about. And, I mean, I work at UJ. It's a government university. I think it's always been, it's... in terms of equity, it's always taken that a lot more serious than a lot of the private schools. And I think even, and I mean, for me, I went to school in the like 1980s, 1990s. I was only used to, you know, like completely white education. And then we're in a situation where we were, now teaching probably one of the most, I suppose, one of the hardest, educational fields to access if you were coming from outside of, like that Western canon. And I mean, to me, that became really important with human-centered design, where it became plausible. What are we talking about when we're talking about design? Where it wasn't just about somebody's inherent ability or their inherent understanding of beauty or something like that. That it was it became more logical. That you could explain to a student, this is why something is a good design, not just because I've been exposed to 100 books on design back home, or, my parents have like a 2 gig, dial-up internet connection, and I can look at anything in the world. There's a kind of a pragmatic logic to it. That it's, you're not designing for white people, you're designing for everybody. But to understand who that everybody is in those particular contexts is something you can learn. It's something that you can apply. It can be taught. It can be, you can understand it through asking and through exposure. It's not something you're born with. And I think that was really important.
I think,
and
I've been thinking about a lot of what you've been saying also speaks to design creating a little bit of conflict. And it hasn't seemed to change that much. If you think about, design now as a way of thinking, not just creating visuals, we have to question things, and questioning things is not always accepted in some environments. And we've made a lot of progress, yes, but you still see businesses or organizations or spaces where output is more valued, and design as a tool to change a business or facilitate growth or facilitate a different way of thinking is often either not accepted or even not encouraged. So I'm trying to think. Go ahead.
Like in the government. I think it's one of those things. I mean, it's design is a very new field in that sense. If you look at the history of architecture, the history of like the sciences, engineering, it stretched back thousands of years. And a lot of it is because I'm not saying design has only got a short history. I think the recognition of what we call design has only recently been disciplined or become part of discourse. I think design is found, I think design is like man's relationship or people's relationship to technology is like as old as, as people are. I think that's what makes us human, is our ability to shape the world around us, which in my understanding, that's what design is about. I think it's there is a strange concept that, that engineering, and I'm kind of making that equation, but we could be talking about many other things, science, etc., is put on a pedestal, where design is still seen as like kind of a soft skill, like a humanities skill.
Yeah, the humanities.
It's like something you study if you're more passionate than like actually intelligent. and I think that is obviously something that is slowly changing. I think South Africa in particular has struggled because I think our government is, I think in that sense, comes out of a different world where, where science was really the be-all and end-all. Where you get those typical STEM subjects, but that's really important, and they are important. I'm not spying, but I think that design is a reasonably unknown. It still hasn't made its case clear to the rest of the world what it's about, and that's you can't designers also tend to sit back and complain about it instead of actually doing the work around it as well. It's like, it's unfair. We don't get treated like, but like, I mean, how many designers actually stand up and say, look, and I'm not talking about necessarily in the workplace where you don't always have the opportunity, but I mean, certain things, like the design community likes to think they're passionate and very close, but I mean, as soon as you ask for volunteers, as soon as you're, looking for people to, mentor students, they all disappear. So it's a lot of it is talk. I mean, there's a lot of great people that have been super supportive as well. Don't get me wrong on that. But I think a lot of it is about understanding you got to advocate for your field as well.
Yeah.
You can't just sit there and take the nice UX salary and think, well, that's cool.
Especially because, like you mentioned, it's such a young discipline still. And we're still trying to prove its value. And also, I think us ourselves, we're still trying to understand where it fits in and actually what the limitations or constraints is of where it can be practiced and how. So a big job there for us as creatives in this field is to advocate for it.
And there's something.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
There's something I'd like to add on, but also maybe shift the lens a little bit, because I think when you look at the way design is changing by the nature of the people in design, there's also something very interesting happening. And it's that there are a lot of people who are not trained designers that are entering the design space. And it's typical. And so, I mean, my family is an amazing example because I technically have no official qualification. My eldest brother, Alex, was like a computer engineer, and then he did like bioengineering and then ended up in design. And then Felix, my other brother, was in human genetics, and he's also ended up in design. And so there's this sort of thing where like, and this is where I guess maybe I'm, it's a hypothesis or a assumption, but I think before that stage actually happens, when people clearly understand the value of the discipline, there's a stage where people who are not technically in the discipline start to migrate. And I think that's both as a matter of maturity, but also as a matter of the industry growing. I think in the industry in South Africa has grown quite a lot, and especially some of the bigger companies like the banks and the insurance companies and all of that, they sort of have a tendency to just fill a role that requires thinking with engineers. Doesn't really matter what engineering they did, like whether it's 100% relevant. And I think it's because the almost tools for thought in engineering apply to design as well, in design's case specifically. And I think maybe it even helps push design more towards that ethnographic approach that we sort of mentioned earlier. I don't know if you've either thought something similar or if you have any comments on that.
Oh, Alfie, I do. You know what I've often thought about this is many times. Okay, I think so there's a couple of questions there.
Mm-hmm.
I think that firstly, what is design? I mean, that is something, I mean, I think this kind of straddles both the conversations like what we're just talking about prior. Is design is, in the English language, means anything. You know, it can be an object, it can be a profession, it can be a person, it can be like a, and I mean, what field of design are we talking about? I mean, engineers design, architects design, computer scientists design. You know, it's design is a human trait.
Yeah,
okay?
It's more.
But I think when we talk about design,
verb.
we often general verb designing. Yeah, I think but I think when we're talking about design, we're talking about probably the more creative fields, which were traditionally the creative fields. When we talk about design with a capital D. I think a lot of this is part of the problem, is that when, as we're not very specific, there's a lot of murky language. And I mean, I don't know how many times I've been to conference talks where somebody stands up and they say, well, design, I'm not going to define it, because there's so many meanings. But I think to me the thing is like a lot of these things need to be defined if they are going to mean things to different people. You know. So I think that's the first point. Is like it's there's a lot of sloppy meanings, which makes people, because then I I I don't want my child to study interaction design because I heard that the neighbor's child got a degree in like sort of interior design and can't find a job. So they're both designers. Like I don't see the difference. So that's kind of one point. I also think that like if we're thinking about things like engineering and that, is we also tend to always put them in opposition, where I think that they very much complement each other. I think the important thing for us is and I think it's Herbert Simons, one of the big old-fashioned design kind of first guys who wanted to scientificize design, and he used to speak about I think like sort of the design outside the loop or design inside the loop, and when he was talking about the loop, he's talking about like sort of like the technological interface. So you get people who design behind the interface, and then people who design for the front of the interface. And I think to me that's quite an important way of understanding what we do. Is that if you get engineers in that, they sort of designing, behind. We don't get to see what they're doing, but we know it's obviously very intelligent, and it's a lot of it is like what makes things
enabling
work.
people. Yeah,
we outside the loop designers, and I think that's like a really important thing to think about. So when I'm thinking about human-centered design, I know people tend to almost take the cliche and always think that it's always about like participatory in that, but I think to me that's any kind of, it's when we think about technology fitting into the world of people. And when I'm talking about the world of people, I'm not just talking about users and what people can do with it. I'm talking about our basic human existence on this planet needs to be included in that. So I think it's planetary concerns as well. So it's beyond. It's not just like the selfish human. I think it's like it's kind of humanity outside of technology is really important.
Yeah, and I think that actually is so important, and it brings to my mind something that's completely off topic, but maybe a little bit relevant, and it's this sort of a similar sort of, I guess, competition, and I'd say it's maybe a little bit more related to the outputs of those disciplines. You could think about it that way. It's sort of like the technology and the in the loop aspect of things has been moving forward so quickly for so long. Like since the internet boom, it's kind of been just on an exponential graph upwards. But like our understanding both of ourselves and how we interact with these devices that we're creating is still on a linear trajectory. And I think design is the one thing that's looking to actually push that trajectory up, because we're actually looking at the technology, trying to understand it as far as we can. And maybe actually design is maybe a little bit too general. And I'll maybe speak specifically about, UI, UX and product design, that specific band, as they interact with the output of the engineers and the developers. And so they've been going exponentially up for so quickly for so long that there's still such a wide gap in terms of both the ground we've covered, but also like the scaffolding to go further. And I think design is only now starting to reach a stage where there's enough scaffolding for almost like the everyday person or the person who might not previously have been exposed to design to actually get in and then make progress once they're already in. And so I'm hoping, but I think that like the ethical aspect of the loop, because I do think that's almost like the role that design plays, is actually starting to pick up speed a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's like a really good point you made, and I think to me this is actually critical And I think thinking about design on this level is like really critical because I mean, I don't know about you guys, but it scares the fuck out of me that a guy like Facebook, like Mark Zuckerberg is declaring that he's going to design our future. I mean, like, he's not even talking about a smart city. He's talking about like the very experience. I mean, like, I couldn't think of anything more scary, in the world than Facebook being like, so. And I mean, this is not on the point of just being like a Luddite or something like that. This is like, I mean, if anybody's read the news, do you think that that guy's not in jail? That he's actually declaring that he owns our future.
Yeah. It's crazy.
That's horrible. That's terrible.
And at least we know about the things that Mark Zuckerberg is doing. I mean, sometimes the things that scare me are the smart people we don't know about. Like, there could be a guy who is right now building a virus to shut down the entire internet and nobody knows. And like and the thing that's really scary about it is there are people like that. There are people who have enough knowledge of technology to completely remove it from everybody. But then you also get people who can't even like operate a TV by themselves, which I guess is a unrelated, interesting parallel.
Yeah. I mean, it's like a crazy that we live in this one world where you have you have like people professing like, oh, we're gonna have them, the metaverse, and then I mean, where 85% of the world are struggling to get access to clean water, But I mean, I suppose it's interesting, and I mean, as much as these things bug me as well, it's also, I mean, sometimes you also have to draw. You have to like bring it down and say, and I do 100% agree that that's the role of design is ethics. Like when we talk about design with a capital D outside the loop, it's an ethical objective, in the broadest sense of the word. But I also get that it's a very easy thing to sit back and we can have a nice Wednesday evening chat about these things.
Or
like,
shift the responsibility.
Work, who's making... Yeah. But it's also, you go to work, and whose responsibility is it? I mean, who's supporting, Zuckerberg? It's not the designers. It's like the venture capitalists. I mean, so I think that like designers often also fall into this, where we can be moral crusaders. We can say, oh, design's to blame for every problem in the 20th century. But I mean, I think if we want to make those kind of changes, I think we always let the financial people off the hook, to a large extent, and managers and shareholders. They seem to get away, So, I tend to take a lighter, view on who's to blame for this stuff when we're talking from a design perspective.
No, and you're absolutely right. I think a lot of people who practice design, we do kind of step back when it comes to taking responsibility for those things, especially when we feel it's not our place, and we leave it to, like you said, the people who manage the money and the finances, because we don't want to get involved. And I think as someone in the industry or in this discipline, we have to almost force ourselves to become more involved in, if it's our organization or our company, we tend to, work in silos, be very focused on only the product that we're busy with, instead of understanding the more holistic, let's say, the trajectory of the company, or what the roadmap is for the bigger picture, so to say, instead of just being zoomed in on the task I'm doing, because that makes it very easy to also then disconnect from the responsibility or push the responsibility onto someone else, because we're only responsible, for this one thing I'm designing or creating right now, instead of almost embedding that in this one piece now, so that can be used as a tool to also help facilitate the creation of that roadmap or that vision for an organization or company.
I definitely agree with you. But I think it is, maybe it's a question of small battles that kind of add up to winning the war. But I also do think sometimes is, these people who are put in these positions where they driving these projects, they're running these companies. They also probably need to be held to more account for it.
Yeah.
I mean, I think a lot of them know exactly what they're doing. And I mean, it's a difficult. I mean, because I suppose as capitalism, how do we get out of capitalism? No one really knows these things. So I'm not pretending to say so, but I do think that it's a bit hard to expect your graphic designer to take the moral stand. When they're the person first to get fired. You know what I mean? It's like, I don't think that's fair either.
Yeah. So what does that look like then? If we're all saying, yes, we should be taking more responsibility for the ethics in design and what that means in the larger scale of things. But what does that mean on a practical level, on what am I doing today level? Terence, you're a lecturer, so I'm sure you've, and I know you've written a lot of papers and comments on the ethics of design or design ethics. So how does that look on a practical level then?
Well, I think firstly, when we're talking about ethics, it's very wide. I think it could be ethical, could fit from anything from plain old usability to like taking some kind of moral stand about a product which we think has got an inherent bias. The thing is, I think some people, you're never going to win every battle. Some battles are run just because, they're shareholders and they need to make their, 0.5% profit, because if they don't make their 0.5% profit, people that have put their retirement savings into like certain funds are going to struggle. I mean, it's finance is a big, interconnected, difficult mess to unravel. Okay. I think a lot of the things is I think that in the last few years that have changed is people are definitely becoming much more aware of what it means to be an ethical human being, like in the corporate world. And I mean, I think in the world in general, even in Hollywood, some people are starting to learn certain things about the world, and I think those things are really important. Those kind of forces, they do have their effect, as much as sometimes they seem silly in the moment, like in certain circumstances you go like, oh, come on. But I think overall they are really positive, and they have got people to rethink a lot of the way they kind of perhaps maybe, particularly in South Africa, in a way almost like pretend they're going along with things like affirmative action, but not really, because no one's really going to check up. I think they've made a lot of the reasons behind a lot of those things, not just affirmative action, but a lot of those issues in the world, a lot more real to people. And I think corporate responsibility has like stepped up a bit. I think that's really important. The other thing, I think the thing is, one of the key things is, I like to believe, and this might be a little bit naive on my side, is that, well, I mean, maybe not so naive, but I mean, we all learn from basic user-centered design that people are more likely to buy products if they can actually use them. And I mean, it's the same kind of thing. It's like, I'm more likely to buy your product if it means that in 20 years, I'm not going to burn to death on the hottest summer ever, like recorded on this planet. I think a lot of this stuff is becoming more common sense. Is that good things are good. Things that are benevolent, things that are like good for everybody else, are usually good for us. And usually people are becoming more aware that these are the things that they want in their life. I mean, we all sitting here in load shedding. I mean, I bet you we all wish we had got solar power a few years back. You know what I mean? It's like it's becoming obvious that, and I think a lot of this thing, I don't know, people are stupid. It just takes so long for them to get, some of these, like, we should treat each other decently. Like, half of our population are not our slaves. Like, if we don't stop driving V8s, we're going to, like the planet's going to die. I mean, I don't know what it takes. So, I mean, you hope. I mean, a lot of it is about hope. But I think a lot of it is verbalizing, talking about things
Yeah.
becomes really important.
And one thing that,
Yeah.
that I wanted to just mention on that specifically, and I think this is maybe a little bit of one of my pet peeves, just because I think me and education generally didn't play too well together. But I'm starting to think more and more that a lot of the cultural problems we have are because academia and the professional environment are too far separated.
Yeah.
I just think more businesses need to be engaging with universities and like long-term relationships. Like professionals should be helping write papers. Professionals should be helping conduct that research. They should be guiding the questions that the research is
Curriculums
asking
and-
because
yeah,
they're the people who
yeah.
are on the ground experiencing the customers, experiencing the day-to-day challenges. And I feel like typically people want to blame it on academia, but I blame business actually. I think for two...
So do I. Do you know? Do you know what? And again, I mean, it's a hard thing. I mean, I've heard this kind of stuff for many years. I mean, I worked in academia, but I've also worked in a lot of done a lot of consultation. So I mean, I've seen both sides of this, and I mean, like, to be honest, business always wants. It's as simple as that, and they want what they want. They don't want what everybody in business wants. They don't want, what would be better for the economy.
Yeah.
They want what they want. And academia actually has to resist it.
Sure.
Because the thing is, to be honest, if I was, when we decided we were going to teach UX, there was no business need for it. We were looking, if you're thinking about academics, we were looking overseas. We were seeing what's coming. Okay? Business doesn't look at that always. I mean, lots of businesses do, don't get me wrong. But I mean, lots of them, they're not always, So, I mean, no business came to us in 2010 and said, hey, we're going to give you guys, here's R1 million, build a UX department. No, because they wanted graphic designers at that time, or they wanted programmers, or they wanted something like that. So I think that's the thing. Businesses also, industries always say like, people aren't coming through. But I mean, sometimes they think universities are there to produce minions for them, like job ready for, this particular niche. I mean, that's not the job of a university. The job of a university is to teach people to think in a particular way. And to be capable of to be responsive and to be agile. It's not to train somebody to do this piece of software or to, understand, what this acronym for banking means. That's really not our job.
Yeah.
I mean, it's as simple as that. I mean, there's certain things that obviously you need students to go after that they're capable of working. That there are certain soft and hard skills that you can say this is a direct index of what fintech needs, for example. But beyond that, I mean, who's to say fintech is going to be around as we know it in 5 years' time? No, fintech doesn't. Fintech's working for tomorrow.
Exactly.
They're working for their annual report. Now, I must accommodate that.
Yeah.
Their annual report. So I do think, I mean, I learned a lot from working with people with industry, that are working day in, day out for years in industry. So don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that there's a strong partnership. But I mean, in South Africa, I think it's always that you hear it a lot. And to be honest, I'm not saying I've heard it from, the fintech, industry. I think they've actually been really pretty happy with, I think, a lot of the work that's been coming in from the universities. So I'm not biting the hand that we've got to feed. I'm kind of I think this is more of a general when I look at sort of when you hear people interviewed, in industry and talking about university education in general, is I think sometimes the guys from industry have no concept of what a university is. It's not just to feed the industry.
Yeah.
It's to do more than that. It's to it's to extend industry. It's to think about where the industry is going to be in 5, 10, 20, 30 years' time is to think about alternative industries.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
I think
Yeah.
those things are really important.
And you're right, because it's almost like you said, business at the time needed this person, but you guys are already thinking about what people would need in 5 years' time. But it does also point to what Alfie said around the gap of actually connecting these two institutions, right? Or these two spaces, that they should actually be more working together, or at least to some extent, because surely if you are paving the path for the future in industries, working with those that are already in the industry also helps them. But
Yeah.
I get what you're saying. It's such a hard it's a hard relationship to foster, and it's a hard thing.
But I mean, there is. Up until COVID, that's the last few years have been like pretty much everything's just been closed off. But I think everyone can always do more. But I think you do get I wouldn't say industry is totally absent. I think they do a lot of. There's always a lot of cross. You get lots of people coming into universities. You get students going out. So I think there is quite a strong partnership. I think sure it would be really we could always have more, but I think it's also one of those things is like the demand of people working in the digital industry at this moment is like ridiculous.
Insane.
Sure it pays well and stuff like that, but who's got the spare time? It's like very difficult, I think, for people to make those kind of commitments and companies to make those kind of commitments, just because I think they're still chasing. There's always like it's almost like there's just another job to do. I think particularly in UX, because it's developed so fast, that there's almost like a skill shortage. It's like a churn that it's we haven't had that. We're not old enough to be able to look back and reflect, and no one ever. Even COVID, we didn't get the time off to like think about what we did there. It just became more. So it's kind of the nature of the beast. Is that we wild? it's things are becoming more disciplined. There's before, as you guys were talking about, you didn't necessarily have to study to be a designer or to be UX. I think a lot of those things are becoming more formalized. And I think universities have a much better understanding of what industry expects or would like. And to me, it's always interesting if you talk to people from industry. Very rarely is about hard skills. It's always about soft skills. Working in teams, working in groups, those things is what they really look for most of the time.
I think so. I just
kind of lost the track there, but
no worries, because there was
carry on.
There was one thing I wanted to mention, and it's sort of like if. So I guess building in some sense on top of the previous point I made about industry and academia working together, because for me, one of the turning points in my professional journey, or entering my professional journey, was actually I did a month of work experience in the middle of the school holidays, and just actually being there and seeing what designers did and talking to people about what they like, what is the actual day-to-day job of a UX designer, as in like when you get to the office, what do you do? What do your meetings look like? How does that actually look? And sort of seeing that gave me an appreciation in some sense that academia couldn't, because academia is in some sense is about learning the skills and the tools and the method of thinking, not necessarily living the job. And I found that there are some people who take to the theoretical aspect of it and the academic aspect of their development really well, and then they struggle a little bit when they're actually in the workplace to readapt to almost like a different way of measuring your performance. And then there are people who struggle in the academic perspective and struggle to pick up the theoretical aspects. But then when they get into the practice, they sort of kind of find a natural rhythm. And I think that those two events or occurrences can be enabled a lot more. And like, I mean, if it was even just something as simple as like the bigger companies, the banks, the insurance companies, and so on, just committed to a consistent graduate program, because I know a lot of them have graduate programs and they're growing and they're developing. But the challenge with the graduate programs as they exist now is you're only experience them when you're already a professional. But in actual fact, at least from my humble opinion, that's something that you should actually do in the process of being educated. Because if you're going in that direction, you sort of want to at least have an idea of what to expect once you start working. And I always found, especially during like my studies, that because I didn't know how to justify the things I was learning, like which things I'm learning are interesting as a theoretical thing and which things that I'm learning are valuable because my job will need them. And because I could never really differentiate that, it was easy to tell myself, oh, actually, I don't need this thing, or I don't need to try super hard. And that was always my struggle with that learning environment. But then as soon as I actually got to see what designers did from a practical perspective, like it let me like retrospectively connect all the dots. Like all the things that lecturers had said that I thought were silly, and that every time that I asked like why am I going to need that in real life, like those dots actually start to get connected. And when that happened, I actually started to enjoy the process of learning even the theoretical stuff. Like that actually started to become something that's interesting because it had implications and effects on the real world and on the practical aspects, which I found maybe a little bit more interesting and a little bit more engaging. So I guess in summary, industry and academia, please.
No, okay. So I think, I mean, like to that point, I mean, like, and I'm very much agreeing with you. This is not a defense of academia. Is that I think 100%. I think most courses, and I'm talking about private colleges and university, they do have these days. They do have, up until COVID at least, they used to have like job shadowing, as opposed to internships, a very particular term when we were younger. It just meant any kind of this, but like sort of that job shadowing was very much a requirement.
Okay, that's good.
I mean, so I mean, I know my students have been, I think, they do it as part of their third year program. They have to do about, I think, 6 weeks of it.
Okay,
I don't know if they all end up doing it, but they do something like that, and I think it's fairly common. I think, but this is one of those things that I do think in terms of design, as much as I say, is like it's a lot of the interactions on personal relationships, like knowing people, which is maybe not good enough to your point, is because, I mean, I know for my students, they tend to, I know there's a lot of the graduate programs, and the people who recruit the graduate programs don't even go to the design courses. They go straight to, the computer science courses or the IT courses. Like their recruitment policy doesn't actually recognize that's where UX designers come from.
Sure.
Like they're misguided in that sense.
Okay.
Well, I mean, when I say misguided, that's the mandate they've been given is to recruit from there. Where it's an interesting point, because if you've got whole departments full of people that have studied design and are not getting the right people coming in through those graduate programs, why are they asking what's your recruitment process? Where you recruited? It's like there's a certain logic to those kind of things.
Yeah.
As well, the other thing is, I think it's also very rarely in the 20 years I've worked at a university that has always been there, have big corporates came to us and said, well, how can we help? There has been occurrences. There have been, particularly a guy like Marcel well, okay, let's not get into names, but a lot of guys have been very useful and very try to help. But overall, no. It's like the universities are there for us to take students from. There's no real thought of maybe we can help pay fees, for students that are struggling or anything like that. No, and maybe they go through different channels. Maybe, like the big banks are saying, well, they already give them money here and there. But if we're thinking about the design world,
yeah,
and it would, you would
it's
think
just
it would be,
where's the graduates?
Exactly, and you would think it would be quite a logical thing, right? Because there's a return of investment there. You're basically investing in the people that you're probably going to employ. So it's the future of your company as well and your industry. So it feels so logic.
Yeah. But I think it is what you mentioned, Terence. Like, businesses are just not good at looking at the future. Like, they're great at looking at today, tomorrow, and next week. And from there on, it just deteriorates.
Yeah, well, I think that's it. And look, to be honest, that's the nature of the beast. And I think that's why you have these kind of... sure, I don't know. I haven't worked with any other industry. A lot of people, some of the best supporters and, have been people from, individuals working in these spaces. But,
Yeah. Look, I think it's pretty clear that with the three of us, we can go on for a very long time, but we're already more than an hour into this. So I think we'll sort of start to step into the closing stages of this discussion. And I think maybe one thing that I would like to ask, just because maybe this is an opportunity that people might not typically get, from your perspective as a person, I guess, who has got a fair amount of the theoretical knowledge, but also maybe also the perspective of a person looking in some sense to the future of this industry. Is there anything either that you're seeing coming that's interesting, or maybe something that you would like to see happen in the future for our industry that's specifically stuck out for you?
So, kind of probably what I would see long term is I think we're always going to have human-centered designers that work as now, that work on a product level. I think that's not going to move away, but I think there's going to be an opening gap where we're going to get, particularly when we're talking about big tech, whether we're talking about smart cities, we're talking about AI, when technology at the scope that the normal designer cannot actually be part of the production process of, literally. They can't make the interface, they can't, they can't access the. I think there's going to be, I kind of feel there's going to be a big role for the designer / anthropologist to be working as almost like a professional researcher for a lot of these big processes where they kind of mitigating the gap between somebody who's deeply knowledgeable about technology, but also has got that anthropological background, but who's different to an anthropologist who doesn't have that to that deep understanding of technology. And to me, that's one of the things that I think if I was preparing students for, I am preparing students for the future as well. I think one of the two things that I think design needs to up its game on is basic understanding of anthropology. I think a lot of it's there, but we tend to do a lot of that kind of user research and that, but then we always take the easy way out to say it's for design, so we don't really have to be rigorous and things like that. And I think that the more and more that the actual rigor is going to be brought into question. Can you make this claim? How you interviewed 5 people, so what? You actually have to be interviewing 50 people, and I think those things are going to become more and more important because when billions of dollars ride on design, you can't just be You can't be as sloppy as I think a lot of people working in industry are being, and academia. When in the teaching of it, it's often like, do some interviews, and then, what do you think's cool out of those interviews?
A Google form.
I think that's,
Done.
Exactly. That's got to be a lot more rigorous and taught properly, those methods. And I think that the other thing is almost the opposite side, is a lot of designers, and it's strange to me, know very little about technology. Like they don't follow, they don't read, they don't understand technology. It's like, what are you doing here? You're like, and I say so, and I meet people that are academics that like don't understand what like the fourth industrial revolution is. They're like that kind of stuff. Like, what is AI? It's not, like, what's the difference between, machine learning? What's like heavy AI? What's light AI? I mean, people don't know these things. And sure that, common man on the street doesn't have to, but I think as designers, we actually need to know those things. I'm not saying we have to make them. We don't have to be engineers, but we need to up our game there.
Sure, yeah. I agree with that point 100%. And I think especially Alfie, that, he moved from working for a bank for a company working with smart tech. It was a bit of a shell shock, because especially if we're designers used to working for companies that are very stagnating in the technology they use, or just, depend on legacy technologies or older technologies. We don't actively go and be proactive about learning more about the technologies that enable the stuff we design for, which is a very valid point. And agree with that.
And I probably the amusing side of that is how people just change what they call things. Like computing's now become AI. Like everybody like it's all days we just say, well, no, that's computing, man. No, like everything's AI or whatever.
Yeah.
Write a simple if statement, AI, done.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a whole other topic for discussion, is the terminology in this industry, because that is just, it's almost like gender. It's become very fluid.
It's a bit like business intelligence. It's just like you don't know what they mean.
That's hilarious. I think firstly, I would just like to say, maybe for everyone listening, there were a lot of those terms that Terence mentioned that I don't even know. And I'm working in a smart tech company, so I've also got a little bit of work to do, so you don't have to feel too guilty. But I think you are right. And it is something that, especially when I moved to this company, it's something that I realized I needed to take much more seriously. Like especially because when you work in a bank, you're using technology that existed for like 20, 30 years already. Like it's got it, because you don't want the person who is managing your money to be using the latest tech out there that has no security like assurance. But then when you leave that space, it's sort of like you don't have that constraint anymore. And if you haven't been keeping up, you've got this huge mountain of reading and learning that you need to do. So you are very right in that you need to really know the technology, both the technology that you deal with, but also the technology that's coming. And as I mentioned, we could go on forever, because it's clear that you've got a lot to share and a lot that's valuable. I think anyone who's kind of joined the conversation until this point definitely has taken something valuable from it. I think I even have, both myself and Steph, I'll speak for you here as well.
I think officially we can say we've been schooled.
So I think, Terence, I just wanted to say, firstly, thank you very much for making the time to come and chat with us. It's been really cool, but also just being willing to share your knowledge.
Oh, well, I think firstly, thanks very much for having me. It's been great to talk about something that I enjoy talking about. For me, that's the one thing that I would say to all young people out there. It's like, make sure you love the thing you do, because there's going to be like many days when you're alone doing it by yourself. And, I'm just happy to, hopefully it came across, and, and hopefully if some people learn something from it, well, that's cool. And it's been great talking to you guys, and I've learned lots from you guys.
Amazing. Terence, I think we will call it there. I think it's been a great episode. And for everyone listening, thank you very much for your time. And please hit the subscribes, the likes, and all of those beautiful things. Maybe I don't know if you're a social media person or if you've got a blog or something like that, but is there any way people can find you if they're interested in your work, or maybe some of the research that you've done?
You know what? I'm in my fifth year of a PhD. I don't think I've looked at anything besides word processor for the last at least 6 months. So, you know what? I've got a page on. So I work at the University of Johannesburg, Department of Multimedia. If you go onto the site, you'll catch me there. Okay. Otherwise, anybody is more than welcome to email me. My name is Terence, so my email is tfenn, FENN, @uj.ac.za. To be honest, I do have a link. You can also find me on LinkedIn. And that's
perfect.
In order to finish a PhD, that's the limit of my social media.
Cool. Maybe what we'll do is also just drop a link to your what is it, Google Scholar page if anyone wants to read some of your papers. But I think let's call it there. Terence, again, thank you very much for everyone listening. Thanks for your time, and have a wonderful day further.